Good. Right, well, thank you very much for coming along, everybody. Really good to see everyone here. Thank you. We're really pleased to be doing this. This is our first time we've done something like this. We're calling this event the Reap What You Sow Live event. So special thanks to our panel here, come all the way up from the south to see us today. So that's really good, and thanks for everyone that's come, and thanks to some of our sponsors that have helped with this event. So Liquid Line, I think most of you experienced their coffee so far, and Tsunami have helped us with some furniture, and Satellite as well. So, and also huge thanks to our own team for pulling this all together, because there's been quite a lot of work over the last little while to make this all happen. So, a few little housekeeping things. We will be having a break halfway through this session, just for 10 minutes or so for comfort break. Hopefully everyone's found the toilets are round downstairs, round to the right of the living wall, right reception there. There's fire exits for upstairs here. You just head back down the stairs. There's a door at the bottom of the stairs. There's no planned fire alarms today, so if it does go off, please, you just need to exit quickly. The muster points are out of the far gate, just outside the far gate, and that's also the smoking area if anyone wants to go for a smoke too. If anybody needs any help at any time during the day, most of our staff have got these lanyards round, so just ask anyone if you need any help for anything or any assistance. And if you'd like to take photos and selfies and things like that, please feel free. So, just a little bit of background. Scott, do you want to just pop that on? So, as a company, we've been in business now for 30 years. The Benham Group started by my father, who's here in the front row, Bob. Yeah, I was part of it from day one. We are kind of, we're all about plants, as you can probably gather. But I think we have a very much of an interest in the whole biophilic design piece, and how that all fits within the whole industry. But plants is one element of it, and that's really where we specialise, doing the whole range of planting from design, installation and full maintenance ongoing. Our kind of roots, if you like, go back to, we like to think some of our roots go back to this guy here called George Forrest, who came from Falkirk in the late 1800s. He went around the world bringing back plants to Scotland. He was one of the original plant explorers, and even today if you go into the garden centres you'll find that some of the plants say Forestii on the end of the Latin name, and they were actually ones that George Forrest brought back here. We kind of like to think we're sort of continuing what he was doing, bringing plants from around the world, putting them in offices around the country. So also my great grandparents, they had a small holding and market garden work that they were doing in Ratho, which is only 20 minutes or so from here, back in the early 1900s. And here we are today doing this, providing all kinds of planting for all kinds of customers today. So I think probably just the other thing I was just going to say, that we very much, whilst we provide planting service, if you just go on to the next, whilst we're all about plants, we are very much seeing that plants is a really key part of any interior design. So when we talk about biophilic design, plants is only one element of it, but what we found is that when talking to end users and people that run offices and so on, is we're actually finding that they are wanting plants and greenery in their offices, but what we found was that if the designer had already designed the space, we were like struggling to kind of find, where do we put the plants, how do we make it look right, the space is kind of already designed. So that was really why we sort of embarked on this journey of working with designers, because we said if we put the planting in as part of the design, not only does the end user actually, that's what they want, but also the final finish looks so much better. So that's kind of how this journey has developed, and we got involved in this research project. Joyce put a note out on LinkedIn saying you were looking for a plant company to work with for this research project, so we kind of got involved in that, and must say thoroughly enjoyed the journey. And we're going to hear a lot more about it today. And I think that's, this is off the back of that, which is why we're hosting this event today, really to take the learnings that have been done to really the next level, to discuss it with those people that are designing spaces today, see how you can actually use these learnings to form the workplace of the future. So, can I hand over to Vanessa to lead us through this day?
Yeah,
is that all right?
Yeah, you can. How is everybody? All right? Yeah, isn't this a beautiful biophilic space? Natural light, space, beautiful wood floor, good acoustics as well, airflow, and beautiful planting around us. This is the perfect epitome of biophilia. So thanks so much, and thanks for hosting this. And I think it's wonderful, and I feel humbled to be asked to chair this panel of elite brains here. The actual results are actually in the 5th issue of the Journal of Biophilic Design. So there's a kind of bit of a spread about that there, and we're going to cover it again in one of the podcasts in the future. And we've got an exciting day ahead. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the ideas, the inspiration, and the evidence as well from this case study. There's going to be a video about it as well. Obviously, it's a nice, tight piece of research to prove that as designers, as business owners, we need biophilic design, how it improves all different aspects, and obviously how it sort of doubles the value. But I'm not going to steal their thunder. They're going to say that. So we're going to talk about that first of all. They're going to sort of set the scene. So there'll be quite a lot from them initially, and then there'll be a quick break. But come back quickly, so don't wander off. Come back, because then at the second half of the morning session, we're going to be explaining why we need biophilia in the workplace, and that's also an opportunity for you guys as well to ask questions, to share thoughts as well. So it's going to quite a fluid sort of pathway today. Then we're going to have lunch. There's a networking opportunity as well, so make sure you bring your business cards or tap your LinkedIn phones, and then obviously ask our panellists anything else, and of course the people at Ben Olm if you want to find out more about their planting and their design, their creativity, which I think is wonderful. And in the afternoon we're going to be looking at the practical application of the evidence and how we can use this in our own practices. And again, it's an opportunity for you to share experience and ask for advice. And then finally, after the session, we're going to talk about the future of biophilic design. What's they going to look like? How do you see it envisaging? And then obviously with these sort of thought leaders here, we're going to kind of delve down and ask their brains for their thoughts too. I might chip in a little bit as well. But so back to this morning. First of all, can we have a round of applause for our panellists, please? So obviously Adrian's introduced himself, so everyone knows Adrian. Then we've got Professor Derek Clements-Croom. He's Emeritus Professor in the School of the Built Environment at the University of Reading in Engineering Research. And then we have Joyce Chan-Schuff, a Sustainability Lead for the UK Parliament's Design Authority, and then Savannah Willits, Team Lead at PLP Labs. So enough from me. We're going to set the scene. We're going to be watching the video, I think. Okay.
This research is really about well-being by design. We're interested to look at biophilia, so the concept of biophilic design, applying it into spatial strategies.
So we conducted an in-house pilot study for about 2 months with 5 participants in a meeting room. We outfitted the meeting room to look like a typical office scenario, and then we measured participants' response to changing environments in 3 different scenarios. So the first was baseline, looking at basic amenities, then typical, so a couple of plants here and there, but nothing extravagant. And the third was immersive, so completely filled with plants, natural materials, natural sounds, such as with water or rainfall. And we measured their reaction to the space through qualitative and quantitative measurements.
The very first result that it came out is spaces with biophilic design has generated a lot more positive emotions. So when we ask our participant to put in 2 times a day how they feel about the space, we immediately see that there is a big contrast between the baseline and spaces with biophilic design in mind. And what we're trying to capture is this flourish moment, the frequency. So it's not just a regular POE that you compare before and after. We try to understand how each moment and time is related to emotions. And what we have done is to translate those moments into a set of monetary value so that it can be understood by commercial decision making. I know it sounds really weird to try to monetize happiness, but somehow, in our process of looking at costs and benefits in commercial decision making, we do need something more quantifiable to make a business case for well-being. And this is part of the design to look at how we can translate these moments into measurable outcomes as part of the economic aspect of the Flourish framework.
We can learn a lot from measuring our buildings in use, and this study has in fact developed an advanced, enhanced way of carrying out post-occupancy evaluation. And the data from that will enable us to improve our design successively in the future.
Lovely, thank you so much. I love the thing about monetizing. We shouldn't be monetizing happiness, but I think that's what this research is so valuable. And as you said, this sort of quantifiable well-being for a business case, which is kind of what we're all about, isn't it? Really, is that when we're trying to get this over the line, what we need evidence to kind of prove to some business owners that we need this. So over to you, Derek and Joyce, to talk about.
Right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And we're going to talk for about almost an hour between us, three here. But of course, look around when you come into this building. Look outside the windows. It says almost more than anything that we will probably show you. But we'd like to start by just showing you some of the scientific evidence and what this project is about on a broader way. And it started, I'm a member of British Council of Offices. We wanted to do more advanced post-occupancy evaluation, basically, because we need data to understand, have a deeper understanding of how people react to their environment, basically. So we did a project for BCO with PLP Architecture and myself at Reading University. And that was published in 2021. And then, of course, we got some interference with lockdown in the process. But we wanted to expand that work. And Joyce, I knew, was working very hard on her PhD thesis involving a lot of good background information as to the value of biophilic design. And she came into our team. And we expanded from there, and then of course Benham became involved. So that's how it started, and now we have this publication, Reap What You Sow, from PLP. And I will give you later, if you're interested, I brought some details of my own work in a book, which I've done on the area. If you contact me, I'll give you some details on that. Could we go to the first slide? So, no, second slide now. Okay, thank you. So buildings and people. People are the core. That's why we have buildings, basically for people. So can we go forward to the next slide, please? Right, and we need the data, as I've just said. Now, what is different today is we used to do questionnaires, interviews. We still do. We still do that. But we've also got things like wearables. Wearables like the simple Fitbit, and some of you may have some other versions, and they're expanding their market greatly all the time. So we have a way of actually measuring people's physiological and psychological state, and that was important. And then comfort. Lots of talk about comfort, but we don't perceive the world really just like that as comfort. We actually take in all array of stimuli around us. We have what we call a multi-sensory perception. We see all around us, and there's lots of stimuli coming into our ears, eyes, and so on, and being transferred to the brain. So we're going to look at something else than comfort. And of course, people enjoy contrasts in the environment. And one thing that biophilia does, it gives us some really very interesting colour differentiation, shape, form, and so on. Next slide, please. So POE, there's some data. I put some very recent ones up. There's lots of data. The next slide, please. And similarly on the value of greenery in the workplace. I put the Reading University work there, which is interesting, very recent. And what I'd like to point out is the second one. The second one there, Phil Beeman at the end, is a psychologist. Ciccia Blanusa is a fellow of the Royal Horticultural Society. And Emmanuel and Jenny are working in my department. So there you see biophilia brings groups of people from different disciplines together to work. So we get the understanding about the human mind and feelings and well-being. We get the detail of what kind of plants, what's the differentiation between one plant and another. Next slide, please. So basically, we all, I think, know this. It's good for well-being. Let's drive a little bit further into that. Next slide, please. So here's some work by Cooper and Browning, 2015. And it reported that environments with natural elements such as greenery and sunlight give a higher level of well-being, productivity and creativity. And nowadays we are seeking to have more creative spaces, as AI is meaning less of the tedious work, more of the creative work. That's very important. Now that was based on a survey of 7,500 people. Next slide. The benefits of it are like two families. One is how it affects people, us, but also biophilia has another advantage in terms of climate change. And you see down that list, physical activity, people go out more into parks, exercise more, reduce harmful exposures, absorption of CO2 and some pollutants, increasing social engagement. Again, it persuades people to go out more. It also has an effect on loneliness. Loneliness tends to be less with green space around. Crime tends to decrease a little as well. It improves mental health. The mental health is a big problem in many countries, not just us. But it also offsets heat island effects. And if you do that, your air conditioning consumptions are less, and therefore those costs go down, and that affects carbon emissions. So there is this two-pronged thing. Now today we're concentrating rather more about the human condition rather than the other one, but it's interesting to note that. Next slide, please. Now that's an example of PLP offices. Joyce is going to talk more about that, and there we see Ben Home in its full glory. I mean, the interesting thing is that often people think just buying potted plants are enough, and of course it's not, and you can see this in this building itself. And we always felt we needed a more immersive environment in biophilia, and Joyce has been measuring some of the reactions of people around. She'll tell you more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. I just want to take 3 slides to show you very quickly the importance of the green argument, because it's going to affect government and how they view the importance of green. So not just the people. This is photosynthesis, and this is the fundamental thing. You know, sunlight acting on chloroplasts in the plant, and they break down the water into oxygen and hydrogen. And it's the hydrogen we can capture, put into fuel pumps and use. The next slide is showing you how, in fact, we're talking more about living architecture. When you take bacteria and algae and mix those with things like concrete and bricks, you actually get a living material. And so this living architecture is also so, because it generates electricity. So you could see how you could have an energy positive generating building. Next slide, please. This is an interesting one, solar cells. Solar cells are at the moment about 25% efficient in transfer efficiency. You put in a plant layer, the green layer, which you see there, and the transpiration in the plant, the water, takes away some of the heat. And that means then the solar cell is going up to something like 50% efficient, which is a very big number. So that's just 3 quick examples of where green is also playing its role in climate change. Next slide, please. So our approach is, we believe you have to think holistically. We have to think systematically about all the things that affect us in the environment around. And obviously that affects our state of mind, our feelings, our emotions. And we need to measure building performance. So what we do is we're going to use the Flourish model, tell you about that in a moment. We're going to use wearables like these things. And we're also got to take more attention to the medical data, why people are in absenteeism and presenteeism. The engagement level in Britain is about 24%, which is very low. And recently, you've probably heard the figures last week, absenteeism days has gone up to about 7.8 person per year, which is roughly 1.5 billion pounds a week lost in that. It's a very big order. And obviously biophilia can have a role in that. Next slide, please. So connected health. Let's understand a bit about the body. You know, we want oxygen in our cells, in our organs, in our body, the nervous system transmitting signals into the brain. Some go into the short-term memory, some into long-term memory, and that's where we grow our experiences of environment. Hormones affect our emotional responses. And most of the things we do in our lives, even when you're a very cool character, there is some degree of emotion involved in our judgments to some degree. Next slide, please. The Flourish model, we've used this, so I'm just telling you first before telling you what it is, in Putney High School, and someone here is into schools, Andrew, yes. And we have a picture right at the end of my presentation this morning, which I'll show you. We're employing it at the moment in Villiers School Master Plan, and the description of it is in my book there, and it's also been adopted now by the BCO in their guide specification for offices 2019. Next slide, please. Wearables can be worn like this. They can be put into clothing, or they can be put into your body, if you fancy that. Next slide, please. Current measures, all those things, you're probably familiar with this. You know, things like sleep quality, important to understand a bit about sleep quality, oxygen levels, brain rhythms, so on, all the whole range of possibility which are expanding almost weekly, actually. And some of you will have read about those developments. Next slide, please. So Flourish. So three main things. We've got the environment, and the environment is objective things like a temperature or CO2 level. We also have more subjective things like beauty itself, but looking out of a window, reaction, or colour, more subjective elements. Both of those are taken into account. We've dodged the slide, cut back. It's also about feelings, the emotion bit. And comfort doesn't really include that. And then the economic value, because that's of interest, of course, in that things like absenteeism, presenteeism, staff retention rates, and so on. Next slide. Well, that should be a triangle showing you. It should be showing you on the right-hand side objective things, on the left-hand side subjective elements. At the top would be environment, on the bottom left is feelings, and the bottom right is economics. Right, next slide. Oh dear, that's not right either. Okay, so this is satisfaction, going up like that. And across this action is how many things you can do to achieve satisfaction. That bottom curve there is comfort. So comfort is a background layer. It's not a thing you particularly remember. The next line, that green line, is personal control, personalization. We all like to have some control over our environment. And the top line, which is missing, there's another line, and that is what I call the sparkle layer. These are the things which may only be short time periods in the day. You look out of a window, see a nice view, see some color, those things. And these are very important because they give micro breaks to the brain. And the brain, you need those to rest the brain in between, or join the brain up, I should say, connect across the right and left hemispheres of the brain. So I'm sorry about that, but I don't know why that's happened. It's all right on our system. Next slide, please. And the Flourish model, okay, that one's come out. Or the top two quadrants are the environmental things. They make an impact on the lower two quadrants, perception on the left and economics on the right. Next slide. And I think at this point, we're going to take over to Joyce is going to say something.
Ross, can I check if it is the version 2 of the presentation? Perhaps that's not the right one. So while Ross is checking the presentation, I can start introducing myself, and thank you, Derek, for talking about the interconnected concept in the background of this research. So I'm a chartered architect by background. I've been working for about 20. Yeah. Oh. Sure. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me. All right. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Now? Great. Sorry, did you not hear me earlier or a little bit? Okay.
Just because of the filming.
Oh, I see. Why. Yeah. So my name is Joyce Chan-Shoff. I'm a chartered architect. I have about 20 years experience in design. So I changed my role from being an architect to now working with Parliament, and increasingly I can see that there is a need for looking at sustainability in a slightly different angle. Unfortunately, we still need to make a business case of why we need to introduce well-being in our workplace or indeed in the wider built environment, and that's how this research started with Benholm and Derek and PRP. I used to work in PRP as well, so that's how the connection starts. So this research is really about using the power of research to influence decision making. Ross, are we ready?
I'm going to just play it directly from what you've sent me, and then we'll switch back to the main presentation.
Okay, all right, okay.
This is just like nature, isn't it? It's like,
yeah.
It's a nice spring day and the crowd comes over.
Yeah.
It's adds to the whole...
And because of the research that Derek and other scholars have been doing, we're able to build up on the shoulder of a giant. So this research, the biophilic research, is not really about questioning whether biophilia is good for us. We acknowledge that, and Derek introduced a lot of evidence already has been done to prove how it links with our emotion, our physical well-being, as well as productivity on an organizational level. We also know that with smart and intelligent building, we can measure a lot of different aspects in the environment. But then my question is, why do we still see biophilia as a luxury? Why do we not have it in our budget plan? So we always, have a spreadsheet looking at how we can improve like energy, changing windows and wall. But I haven't actually seen any organization would put a budget on multi-sensory experience, for example, biophilia or indoor plants. So we're really taking a step back to see, what is the value? How do we use the existing business case framework, the cost and business analysis? Would you like to show your 2 slides beforehand, the triangle, before we move on?
Oh.
So I think I did. If you just go 2 slides up with the triangle, there you go. That could. I just think it is a very important slide.
All right. I'm so pleased. So it's sort of just saying what I did say to you, that you could recognize daylight, air quality, things which you measure with instruments. On the left-hand side, a little bit more tricky because some of those things don't have numbers particularly, and we have to learn how to handle numbers and words. We shouldn't be frightened about that. And also, those physical things impact our feelings here, the bottom left, our perception, our state of satisfaction, our happiness, which Joyce has referred to already, And economics on the side here, a number of different attitudes there. It's not just absenteeism, presenteeism, staff retention rates. But on the next slide, now you see the sparkle there. So you can see satisfaction, the presence of the requirements, and so flourish is the sum of those three lines effectively. At any point along there, you combine those three things, and that is what flourish is about. So it's the background comfort, but it's also those lovely things that happen during the course of your day, which are often memorable things too, which count, and they're very important. We've neglected them. The transients are very important to the brain. Okay, now it's back to Joyce, I think.
All right, thank you. So yeah, next slide. While we were having coffee, we were talking about storytelling, and I think biophilia is a subject that is really about telling the story, finding meaning. So the term biophilia, it means the love of life. This is an image in Ukraine, and we use this image to kick off our co-design workshop together when Russia invaded Ukraine at the time, so it was pretty depressing. However, I thought this is such a good kind of example to show the power of nature, the link of love, and how we care for each other. This is actually a tunnel. The next image, please, Ross. That links to a wooden a timber factory, and this is actually the only way to transport to there. I thought it's just such a proactive way to really go from one place to the other. And this is really helping us to go beyond ourselves. So I think biophilia is really helping us to think about we're part of the ecosystem, the consideration and what it means to be a human being that relates to each other and our planet. And also it's a constant change for our civilization. So those changes are actually very reliable changes before we introduced climate change into our planet. So that's part of what nature do. And for me as an architect, and from Asia as well, like I think the way how we introduce rationalization, framing nature is part of the storytelling. Next. And as Adrian said, this is pretty concrete-like, but is it biophilia or not? So I think there are a lot of spaces around us are inspired from nature, and sometimes it's not so obvious. And most people would think, biophilia just means plants, but we know that it's more fundamental, so we don't want to start thinking about designing nature into our space when it's already done. We really need to think about it, from much more before the interior step, and maybe also from the landscape, how we approach to a space on the regional and city scale as well. And Derek also mentioned about the heat island effects. So the way how we frame biophilia is much broader than this. Next, please. And actually, I didn't frame it. There is a very famous scholar already, Browning and Keller, along with O. Wilson, who started the biophilia hypothesis, and there is this three classification that we use used to run our workshops, the direct connections with nature, where we can see, hear, having that direct connections. And indirect connections is more the design and human introduction of material, form, pattern. A lot of historic building, the places where I work on is actually so much inspired by biophilia with the color choices, the tactile and everything else that goes into a building. And the third one is nature of space. It's more subtle. It's the way how we conceptualize a space. So you will realize that in workspaces, for example, or maybe in classrooms, student tends to sit at the back because there is some protection and you can see the prospect. You can run away from the teacher. So those are the three classification of biophilia. Next, please. And so it runs to our question. Now we know biophilic is good for us. And so what's the business case? And we are asking specifically, is the well-being by design? I think with all this measurement, we know that we can measure all this productivity. But what we struggle with is, as a designer, how can you prove the specific design strategies are relating to some kind of value to an individual and then translate that into an organization. And basically a decision maker will walk into the room and ask, why do I care? What is it in for me? So that's the question I've been, put forward, and I thought, well, I'm going to spend a few years of my life and try to answer that question. And this is the Francis Crick building where we started the journey from in King's Cross, actually, a collaboration between PLP and my previous office, HOK. Next one. And yeah, so unfortunately, we can only see what is in our mind already. So sometimes we believe in what we believe, and this research is really about challenging that, and it's really relating to, next please, Ross, the complex stakeholder, the relationship in our industry. So decision maker would want to understand what he or she has invested in the space, whereas for designer, we are somehow biased. We want to prove, right? So we want to try to find a way to prove the value of our design. With building occupants and facility managers, they have a view to improve, either improving themselves, improving the productivity, or improving the space. So this research acknowledged the different motivation, and how do we then understand this complex relationship and try to sell the business case of well-being to decision makings. So next one. Then my next question is, okay, now that we are, well, actually I asked that question earlier. Now that we understand the benefits, so why is it not part of every workplace design brief? How do we use this as a tool to tell our clients to include it, in our next project? The next one, and then it goes to a little bit more detail, Ross, please, on the reason why we can't see something. So it's a little bit on an iceberg. So at the moment, we're still looking at capital investment versus operation cost. And you might have heard it in other presentation about biophilia already, about this 90%. So 90% of an organizational expenditure is really on people. So the missing step as designer is really linking that value with the whole life cycle of people's well-being and productivity in the whole mix of things. And as you know, like a building cost is about 1%, and then another 4% is on energy and operational costs. The 95%, well, 90 to 95% is really on how the company spend on wages and also benefits. Derek mentioned about the stress level in the UK and many other countries. Increasingly, I think this year is one of the highest sick leave, and it's not because of COVID, it's actually because of stress. And that is good news for us, because biophilic design is really one of the solutions to make sure that we're creating workspace, in particular, a little bit more collaborative, creating that calmness, but also creating a social space for people. Next one. And then closing the loop. So I'm not too sure whether you're familiar with the term post-occupancy evaluation. So it's really linking that in-use data back to the business case in a way that is not overwhelming. So we have established that you can measure air, temperature, energy on the comfort level. You can measure heart rate, brainwave, blood pressure. But then how do you then bring it to the board, to where you look at really hard data and argue against some of the decision upfront? One of the way, and I'm not saying that this is the only way, it's still an ongoing research, is to really look at a holistic view of how things happen, but also having the ability to condense those information into insight and actionable that can compare with the cost. And that's why I think it's so important to link that 90% of cost back to this benefits. Otherwise, it's really, really difficult to argue that the benefits that we're bringing in is more than the capital investment. So that is how we fundamentally build up that idea, the research gap. Next one, please. Okay, I think you need to perhaps press a few more buttons. So for me, a lot of the organization that we're working with would have a business plan, and then it uses, they would use environmental, social, and governance as a model. So to link the value, biophilic value, back to a business plan, we are exploring the potential of introducing social value monetization into biophilia so that you can compare all the other design strategy procurement programs. So it's very common, for example, for a company to say, I have a 50 million capital investment in a building, and then I have introduced 30 work experience into the whole design process and community outreach. So this research is about bringing well-being by design back to the whole social value monetization. So we can start to compare things that investors care about in their business reporting. It becomes in the top of the agenda. I think sometimes, as we see, if you don't see something, you just don't know about it. And so part of the question that I have, how can we create that alignment so that it becomes our design brief and designer can do what they're good at doing. Okay, I'm going to go very quickly to the research. I know that you're very keen to hear the output. Next, please, Ross. Okay, so how do we link this value? We have done about 4 weeks research with PLP, and I didn't think it. The design done by Bennenholm, the immersive experience, has, as we expected, has proven a much more positive result than the 2 other scenarios that we created. So next one. And so we adopt Derek's flourish model as a concept, linking the design input to the impact outcome. And then we introduced different methodology to mix the subjective and objective measurement into one place so that it's quite easy for us to comprehend. Next one, please. So the process is very dynamic. We start with the design, which is a subjective parameter. We look at what goods look like, what kind of biophilic experience we want to create on the top left. And then we measure the environment with indoor environmental quality sensors. And in some building, you can use the building management system as well if you have access to it. And then we mix it with 2 types of outcomes. One is from people's perceptions, either objective measurement of people or subjective measurement through questionnaire and workshop. And then we have done a cost-benefit analysis on all of those data to come up with the value. So that's the whole process. Next one, please. And as I said, you have seen many circular diagrams, I'm sure, but this research also combined other framework, as I introduced, the 15 patterns by design to guide us through the design process. We're looking at RIBA best practice health metric as well. So the alignment is important for designer to find an anchor on what they are used to. So those are the parameters that we define what good looks like. And then the hierarchy of need is from a psychologist to define how do you ask a well-being question, what is a robust methodology. And then we use the government Green Book as an appraisal methodology to introduce the value into the mix of the research. Next one. Okay, and then the value-based approach to POE. Yep, thank you. Okay, here I'm going to start to introduce the outcome of that. So we started to ask PLP staff, we invite everyone to think about what do they feel about the existing space, and guess what? They said, plants, shout really loud. light, they need more space, they want nature. You know, some of them talks about desk and office. And as you can appreciate, it's not only about having some greenery. There's a lot of other complex issues that an organization wants. So this is really just a snapshot to show what is shouting the loudest. Then we think, okay, let's give it to them. Let's respond to what is being asked. So the next one. And then we start to do what we're good at. We go back to the drawing table. We say, well, let's do a pilot study using an existing meeting room. We set out scenarios. We look at, well, when we say immersive, what does that mean? What is immersive? What does a typical scenario would represent, and what is a baseline? So for us to measure a value is really about capturing that unit of change. And that's why we're creating that scenario to understand, you know, is immersive the right thing for PLP? Is it for the whole office? Or maybe a mixture of typical, or maybe do nothing. Maybe some people will just leave me alone. So we try to use a scenario to really test out those participants would feel in those 4 weeks. And this one you probably are familiar with now, 15 patterns of biophilic design. So we use this pattern to go through what kind of mix we want to introduce. And really important is to look at the space, look at what is free already. So PLP has amazing view in the middle of London with view out to the sky. And as well as neighbor has a very lovely roof terrace as well. So we're looking at what is already there and try to use a design to highlight it as a first place and capturing all the different idea. Next one. Yep, and then we pick 4 patterns out of those 15. So the thing about biophilia is just so broad. Some way it just means, you know, being a good designer to an extent. But then what we're trying to say is, well, there are different intensity for different purpose. So a workspace has many different kind of needs for different people, and we acknowledge that needs and be very sensitive and contextualize those design strategy for the space to start with, okay? But we also identify, okay, that smiley face hiding behind the plants. So Derek talks about sparkle, and in this 15 patterns, it's called a wow factor. So we tasked Adrian to make it, you know, really wild in that process. So we look at what is there in the structure and frame the whole space through co-designing the process together. Next, please. And then this is an intensity mapping. So with different strategy, you can pick some dominant feature. You don't have to bombard the whole strategies to participants. So this is the pattern that we choose. Is very individual to this case. I'm not going to elaborate more on that. I just wanted to let you know the process that we have gone through. So the next one. And then we design a process. Since this is a research, it's not really going to stay. So we look at how we can introduce a baseline and then provide an immersive, wild environment to see whether it is really wow or is it just us. And then go back to the baseline. And then we introduce some plants back at the very end of the experience, just to see how do the emotions would change by giving those choices to people. We also engage with the whole office. Although this is a pilot study, we have asked PLP staff to go and have a look at the end of the experience, and then we ask everyone to make a choice of what kind of workspace they would like. So although this is quite small, we get quite a lot of comments from the majority of the people there as well, which is important to make it representative. Okay, next one. Thank you. And then this is the value-based approach. I'm not going to bore you with that, but I just want to show you that there is quite a lot of steps to get to those numbers. It's not that difficult to get to those numbers, but then what decision maker would ask is how robust it is. And this is the way how we wanted to use it follows the Treasury Green Book, every single steps to make up those numbers. And I can come back to you, after the morning session once you get your heads around it, and let's see whether I can convince you actually. The next one. So the research outcome is multi-layer. Next one, please. The first one, we go for the easy one. We just ask, so which one do you prefer? And this is from the large-scale sample, which is the PLP whole office, 80.5% reported that they wanted to have an immersive scenario in their office. Typical is not doing too bad, actually. It's about 17%. And from our existing survey, so we start asking them how do they feel after COVID, and everyone felt like they do need the change. So it's a very strong voice from the studio that it needed a change to what is happening there. Keep going. And then this is the daily log. So we mentioned before that we asked the participant in that room, which was 5 in total, and then we monitor their emotion, and you can see that the immersive one has a lot of peak. So remember, emotion is not a steady state, it goes up and down, which is what we kind of expect. The baseline one is a bit high, but we expect that they were very excited about being away from the main office. It was a bit high, and it is important to have a baseline, a settling down period when you look at POE. Some of the POE is not really showing us the results because we perhaps asked the question a bit early, that those people are still in the honeymoon period. And then it also showed that the baseline is very disappointing as well. After all the immersive plans were being taken away, we thought we were a bit cruel in doing this. I managed to pass the ethical form from my university. But I mean, this is what we try to do. We wanted to see, how do they feel. Sometimes you don't actually feel like you miss out something until they're not there anymore. So those are the concepts that we were trying to design, and giving them a bit of plans does help. So it goes back up again with the finance and arousal. So it kind of showing us this is what we are hoping for, and that's the expected outcome. And the next one. And then those are the indoor environmental outcome. Is really important to, when you ask a question, when you show the value, decision maker will ask, how can you prove those values are relating to your design? So the indoor environmental quality is to demonstrate that it is not because it's too hot or too cold or too stuffy. And this is really testing the background steady ambient environment. Next one. And then we use the monetization process, looking at capital cost that we have invested into the scenario, looking at the benefits, translating those emotions that we have measured, attach it to a financial proxy that are based on much larger sample size and is published by other researchers to link those. And interestingly, although the value itself, before we deduct the capital cost, the immersive one is way, way higher than the typical. But because of the strategy, the investment that we put in, if you really look at it on a balanced, typical option, if we look at that from a cost and benefits or value for money strategy, the typical one is not too bad. It's actually, for this particular case, is giving us a good enough value without going too deep into the pocket. So I think as designers, we need to find a way to explain a situation, and then we come up with some more questions about, do we need immersive in the whole office? Is it good, across the board, or is it maybe it's a zoning? So we know immersive is good, but is immersive good for everywhere? So that raises a lot more research question, as you do when you do research. You probably find more questions than answers. But this is really interesting than the next one. This is still an ongoing thing. We actually just did this a few days ago, and the outcome is not quite there yet. But what we're trying to do is to look at, well, what does it mean? So now we have done a pilot study. And if we use this value to be overlaying it into a whole office indoor plant strategy, what does the value means for this organization? And we think that at the moment, and yet to be verified, that a non-biophilic workplace compared to a biophilic one, the biophilic one will deliver 13 times better the value. So I think, I mean, we still need to check a bit more in detail, but we think this is one of the arguments that we want to put forward to the management board of PLP, and indeed we wanted to test it in some other case study to make sure that this is a methodology that we can adopt. It's a very short statement, but then it comes out from a lot of data supporting those cost and value analysis. So the next one, please. Okay, and Ross, next I think we can put it. So yeah, just to recap on the framework that we've been using. So we introduced the 15 patterns of biophilic design in the subjective parameters, and then ROST, and then we, sorry, there are 4 steps, yeah. And then we look at the well building standard, we look at BCO, we look at CIPSE's indoor environmental data to give us the baseline. What you can see here, also put down specialists. As you can see, biophilia is multisensory and it's also multidisciplinary. So when we started the project, we realized that between architects and PLP labs and academics, we do need Adrian to come in to tell us, what kind of plans, how does it relate to health and well-being. So there's a lot of collaboration to make a successful design. So one of the questions from the outcome is, what is the role of designer in this biophilia momentum, and how do we make ourselves better to understand the measurement of both objective and subjective well-being. So it's really important for us to present an evidence-based when we do design. And then the Green Book could possibly a good way for us to monetize those benefits. So next one. I think that's all for me for this morning. I'm happy to do a bit more, and it's rather long. It's Derek, I think.
I have just a finishing point. Oh, right. So just in conclusion from our work, our total work, wearables are a valuable thing for measuring people's physiological, psychological states. We can look at the differences between individuals. One of the worst things in science is the average. The average loses a lot of detailed information. The most interesting thing about studying people is the differences between us and understanding the extremes and the similarities and so on. So that's very important. And the steady state versus the transient. We've neglected the transient. We think, oh, it's a fleeting moment, doesn't matter. But in fact, it does matter. And it's holistic, as Joyce has been talking about as well. It's a holistic perceptual start. Next slide, please. I've just got to quickly go. The futures. So we're going to carry on developing Flourish, multi-sensory design. We're going to look more into these figures on the loss of productivity in the office. And we're looking at how we define space quality. So that's a very whole thing, not just biophilia, but it's inclusive of that. We're going to look at that. And also our link with the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, where they're looking at the importance of how our self-management in the workplace regarding nutrition and sleep quality are important. And we've looked at a little bit of EEG, looking at brain rhythms, but we've got a long way to go with that. Next slide, just some pictures now. Our endings are beginning, so we're coming to the end of our little session here, but this is only beginning, and as Joyce has just been said, it raises more questions than answers sometimes. And so we need to recognise that spaces we're in, they're not just functional. That used to be the old case. They're actually something we can enjoy. We can have soulful spaces, soulful, joyful spaces, not just functional spaces. And if you just have profit-motivated productivity, that's fairly empty. Next slide, please. So just 4 or 5 pictures, just to not talk about too much, but just to show how people can move around the office more. Activity, working, sitting, standing is important. You know what they say, movement, motion is the new lotion. The next slide. Restorative zone view, be able to go outside, no, inside, not just inside, inside contrast again. This idea of contrast in your workday, not just glued at your desk sitting. Next slide. This is the Daxia Tower in Xi'an in China, which is not yet built. It's 2025. And I'm showing it because the next picture, you can see within the tower, the next slide, please. You could just see on that picture there, it's plants all throughout. They're going to have internal gardens because this is thought to be important now. China's recognizing this now, which you might be surprised to hear about. Right, next slide. This is the, if you go to Rome, the Flourishing Museum, rather nice to visit. The next slide. Now, this is my last slide, this is it. And this is the Putney High School for Girls. And I work with Claire Bowman of RCZM Architects with this to have clusters. Now, this was a year study, and that involved the pupils. We were measuring things, their reactions, as well as the conditions of the environment. And it was all very positive. We want to have plants. We feel better, we work better, we learn better, we remember things better, and all sorts of recognition that planting was very important. And nicely, this was exhibited at the 2021 Chelsea Flower Show, and I was amazed because I wasn't there at the beginning part of that, and I walked in and said, oh, we've got a gold award. We've got a gold award for this. So it was nice that the horticulturalists are recognising another value of planting other than the things they normally talk about. So that's it. Thank you.
It was lovely. Thanks so much. And you're, Savannah, you're going to speak now. Yeah.
I just have I'm very wary of time, so I'll make this really quick. Also because I'm just reflecting a lot what Derek and Joyce have talked about with the research. And it was incredible seeing it from the ground perspective. Particularly when we walked into the office at first, it's baseline, which means it's very white, it's very functional, it's no frills, only business. And once they implemented the immersive scenario where you've got a plant chandelier and this beautiful plant wall like the one behind us, I remember walking in for the first time and being absolutely shocked and having my jaw drop to the ground and being like, this is what it could be like. This is what our office could feel like, it smell like, look like, and just how much more the uplift of the well-being and imagination and lack of stress that brings on even just a personal level. And we definitely felt that as the participants, as 5 participants, as Joyce was mentioning, they really felt that when you had the baseline and everyone walked in, they're like, yeah, we're used to this, we know what we're getting ourselves into. You give them the immersive scenario, they're like, wow, this is more than I ever thought I could imagine, this is beautiful, I love working here. And then you take it away and you go back to baseline and you just feel the drop in the emotion. People are not happy. There was a distinct emotional difference walking into the room during the immersive scenario versus the baseline scenario. And then you bring them back to typical and like, okay, we've got a few plants here, we've got a few natural materials, we can make it through the day. And that was honestly the best part of the entire, being part of the experiment, being part of this research. And I think it also, if we'll skip a couple of slides real quick, of the scenarios, like this is what we were working with at the very beginning. We'll move on, keep rolling. Very minimal, yeah, we'll keep it rolling. We got the immersive, you're like, wow, this is beautiful, stunning, lovely, fabulous, never been done before. we'll keep it moving. What it's like, a lot of places to reflect, and then we go back to the typical and be like, okay, we can work with this. Next slide. But again, like what was really important about this, especially for PLP, is that people felt very neutral about our workspace. They're like, this is bland, all right, we've seen this before. And that also is meaningful because 80% of the staff spend 85% of the time at their desk. They don't move around. They're in the same spot 8 hours a day, if not longer, 5 days a week. So if you have like plants around our natural materials, it really makes a difference, as you can see the next slide. With like such more positive uplift and well-being and emotional capacity. And we even see this with the research that Joyce has done about the monetary value of that with a 200% uplift, which is quite significant. That's not a statistical error. That is significant. And that, I think, is by far the best thing that really have come out of this is being able to show like the emotions, the well-being we have, is you can value it and communicate that to stakeholders who are going to make a difference and who have the decision power. But it's been a lovely time to be part of this.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks so much. Well,
very final remark. So although we present you with a lot of number, but we also recognize that a decision is just not made by numbers, it's made by storytelling. And I hope that we tell you a story, a journey that we have gone through in the last year and a half. Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. I mean, there's so much to take in there. We're going to have a break, but before we go for a break, is there a pressing question before we go for a break? We're going to follow this on afterwards, but should we go for a break and then come back? Yeah. Well, just to say thanks so much for the panelists, and what a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal research that's been done, and it's collaboration as well from everybody, you know, the sort of different, you know, from the wearables all the way through to like the perception and then the people and then everything. So yeah, I think this is going to be such an amazing piece of evidence that we can use as designers to really get things over the line. I mean, and just like what you just said, 13 times. I mean, that's bonkers, you know? I mean, that's a big number. So yeah, so anyway, we'll enjoy the coffee. And we'll see you back here in 10 minutes, so 10 to, is that all right? Yeah, lovely. Thank you.